and I have the honor of editing the volume, putting together the materials from 4 panels, 2 of which were at the International Studies Association, 1 at the AAS, Association of Asian Studies, and this is the 4th and final and most timely panel as we examine strategic thinking in North Korea. What are they trying to achieve? KEI has organized this, and Kyle has been the chief figure here in bringing us together. And now we have 4 panelists, all of whom have written papers, and shortly those will be finalized after the North-South Summit, leading to a final part of the book. Hopefully that'll be out in the middle of the summer, presenting the papers from all of these panels. So today we consider North Korea's strategy from 4 perspectives. The first is public relations, how they're trying to create an image this year, different, radically different from their image before. And we're fortunate to have Jo here. She's the assistant editor of the Asan Forum, and she will be discussing what North Korea is doing to reshape its image. Then we'll go to North Korea's diplomatic strategy, and we'll have the Vice President of the KEI, Mark Tokala, talk about what North Korea is doing diplomatically and where their diplomatic approach is heading. Then we'll consider the economic strategy of the North, and Bill Brown, who's long followed this with the intelligence community and now outside, will be examining that. And finally, we will have General Chun talk about North Korea's military strategy. Now, of course, all of us are reflecting on developments occurring almost hourly. There are so many changes occurring, so what was written in a paper 2 weeks ago may need to be revised a good deal, and so I'm very curious as to what the comments will be from our distinguished group of speakers. We turn now to our first speaker, Jo.
Hi, thank you, Gil, for the introduction. Can I have my slides up? Should I?
You want to go there? Use this.
Perfect. So I was tasked to focus on North Korea's public relations strategy in 2018, and I used this mainly by using the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics as a case study for understanding how Kim Jong-un's public relations strategy is similar to and also different from his predecessors, and also what it tries to achieve at home and abroad. So to understand Kim Jong-un's public relations strategy, I think a good place to start is to understand the Kim family's public relations strategy, because a lot of those elements are invariable. And there are 3 elements that recur throughout the Kim leadership, which is the promotion of the Juche ideology, the promotion of the Juche Suryang system, and nationalism. First, this is very broad, but I'm touching upon this to be able to discuss how Kim Jong-un's public relations strategy differs from his predecessors. So first, the Kim family promotes the Juche ideology, which is perhaps the most central ideological concept that is at the core of the regime's narrative. It broadly translates to self-reliance and has 3 dimensions: political, economic, and military. Previously, Kim Jong-il focused on the military aspect to legitimize his Sungun 정치, which is the army first politics. And today we have Kim Jong-un, who focuses on his Pyeongjin line, which is the simultaneous pursuit of both the economic development and nuclear weapons. Now, secondly, the Kim family promotes the Suryang system, which is essentially a dynastic structure that establishes the North Korean family, Kim family, as the nucleus of the North Korean political leadership. The system is propagated by forging cults of personality and spreading regime propaganda. A key example of this is the Mount Baekdu bloodline, which essentially establishes Kim Il-sung as the sole founder of the North Korean nation and his family as the only rightful successors to his throne. This explains why, even after their deaths, Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il are both revered as eternal leaders of Juche Korea, and why Kim Jong-un himself tries to forge his own cult of personality by imitating his more popular grandfather, both in terms of mannerisms and appearance. The third, the Kim family promotes ethno-nationalism, mainly by fanning fears of external threats and enemies. Key examples are Japanese and Americans, who are depicted as imperial forces trying to subjugate Korea. Here, a key distinction is made between the South and the North, where the South is contaminated by association or submission to the United States. And so the North represents the only truly pure agents of Korean liberation and nationalism. And going one step further, because the Kim family is at the center of this Korean liberation movement, the nationalism that they promote tends to have a very personal touch, hence the name Kim Il-sungism and Kim Jong-ilism. Now, even as Kim Jong-un adopts many of these traditional elements of the Kim family public relations strategy, he promotes an image of modernity that is distinctly his own. From looking at many of his public relations strategy in 2018, it's clear that he wants to paint himself and the country as modern, prosperous, and also global. This is demonstrated by the number of references that he makes to global trends in his speeches and public addresses, as well as how his promotion of Pyongyang policy or economic development is mainly geared towards building luxury establishments like ski resorts, dolphinariums, airports, rather than focusing on the basic necessities of the people. And these luxury establishments are meant to be markers of a modern state that he wishes to boast about. And third, he involves women in image-making initiatives, the key examples being his wife, Lee Seol-ju, and his sister, Kim Yo-jong. And while all of these initiatives do not necessarily translate to major political changes, they do help Kim to promote an image that is modern. So, using this framework, we can dissect and analyze the 2018 Pyeongchang Olympics as Kim's public relations effort. And there are three features that I found to be particularly notable. The first is the fact that on the eve of the Olympics, the regime hosted a massive military parade in celebration of the founding of its army. And Kim Jong-un deliberately changed the Army Day from April 25th to February 8th in order to host this military parade before the Olympics. It appears that the primary objective of doing this was to promote an image of a formidable but still peace-seeking country, and primarily among his domestic audience, not his international audience. This is evidenced by the fact that, contrary to common practice, he did not invite any foreign journalists during the parade, and he also retaliated against South Korean criticisms of the parade by canceling the cultural event in Mount Kumgang, citing expressly that this was a domestic celebratory event that South Korean conservatives were criticizing. So to me, this entire saga illustrates in a way Kim Jong-un's intention or desire to promote an image of peace before his international audience, even as he projects a perception of strength among his domestic one. Another interesting feature of his charm offensive in Pyeongchang is his promotion of the Wonsan tourist area, in particular the Mashingnyang ski resort, where he negotiated with the South Koreans to host joint ski training. Domestically, Mashingnyang is a really important symbol and an important propaganda tool. It symbolizes North Korea's newly found prosperity. It symbolizes North Korean resilience. And the term Mashingnyang speed is actually used in a lot of regime propaganda materials to instill a sense of responsibility or a juche mentality among the masses. Internationally, too, Mashingnyang represents progress and modernity again. It's Kim Jong-un's way of signaling that, unlike his grandfather and father, he's not just interested in surviving and fighting the Americans, but that he's interested in people having fun. It challenges the predominant picture of the regime as depraved, as destitute and poor, and promotes an image of modernity once again. Now, the last one is, I think, the most interesting, which is his use of female envoys during the Pyeongchang Olympics. Starting with Hyun Song-wol, a North Korean singer who was handpicked by Kim Jong-un to lead the Moranbong Band. Moranbong Band is probably the first modern pop group in North Korea, and they debuted in miniskirts and high heels, singing the theme song of Rocky. So they, in a way, they symbolize North Korea's supposed embrace of globalism. She was also once rumored to have been executed for making pornographic videos. So I think her presence in South Korea was all the more intriguing because it basically exemplified the fact that narratives and stories about North Korea can often be wrong, and also that North Korea is a modern state with beautiful, empowered women like herself. A more interesting and prominent figure whom Kim sent is, of course, his sister Kim Yo-jong, who led the North's Olympics delegation. She is considered to wield significant power, also because she is part of the Mount Baekdu bloodline. And as you may have seen from the extensive coverage that she received in South Korea, she also behaves very differently from her brother, who's often quite ostentatious and brash. And so her image was, in a way, intended to replace a picture of the regime that is politically and culturally male-dominated, and also to challenge the notion that it is led by an irrational or crazy leader. And again, give credence to the message of peace that North Korea was sending. So with this public relations initiative, what has Kim Jong-un really achieved? Well, it's clear from dissecting Kim Jong-un's public relations initiative that it was designed to support his strategic agenda, which is to break free from the debilitating economic pressure and political isolation by holding hands with South Korea. And if Kim, essentially it comes down to whether Kim is able to extract concessions or rewards from the United States and South Korea such that he can promote his Pyeongjin line, such that he can deliver on his promise to his domestic people in order to strengthen his domestic legitimacy. So it depends on what the external reception of his initiative have been. The response from South Korea, as you may already know, for the most part has been positive, though internal division is growing and suspicion still exist. And this divisiveness have deepened because of the United States reception, which has been seemingly negative. And I say seemingly negative because despite all the rhetoric and public relations campaign against North Korea during the Olympics, it has agreed to hold talks with Kim Jong-un. These reactions do not translate to the strategic value of Kim Jong-un's public relations strategy, and this will depend largely on the outcomes of the upcoming summits with Moon and Trump, and principally the latter. And in the short term, the prospects of any groundbreaking outcomes at the Moon-Kim summit are, I think, low. And I'm being told to wrap up. I think Moon has a very narrow scope of rewards that he can offer to Kim at this point. So it'll be limited to very symbolic gestures like humanitarian aid and family exchanges, and the real diplomatic tests that will determine the strategic value of what Kim has done in his public relations initiative will rest on the outcomes of his summit with Trump. I think I'll leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a terrific overview of the public relations discussions and efforts underway led by Kim Jong-un. Now we go to the diplomatic efforts. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Gil. It's unusual to present an academic paper. You have to check the headlines before you step on stage to see what's changed. So we're trying to keep up. That's kind of how it is. Time is short, and I know you're going to have questions and comments of your own, so let me just tear through an outline of what I was going to say rather than a speech and try to save some time. Off the top, I would say that it's not easy to understand North Korean diplomacy because of the secretive nature of the state. So in terms of how they'll negotiate, how they plan to engage, what their objectives are, we can guess, we can't really know. But the good news is we have some experience dealing with North Korea. We had the agreed framework talks in the 1990s. We had the six-party talks in the early 2000s. We had the Leap Day Agreement of 2012. So U.S. negotiators have engaged with North Korea in the past. The recent move on North Korea's part marks an abrupt change, kind of head-snapping, because remember what happened in 2017. This was a year when North Korea, in defiance of the UN Security Council, carried out 3 ICBM tests and 2 underground nuclear tests. They threatened an unimaginable attack against the United States and officially announced they would never give up their nuclear weapons. And now we're hearing that they may indeed negotiate denuclearization of the peninsula. So we're seeing at least agile diplomacy, if nothing else. A big turning point seemed to come during Kim Jong-un's New Year's speech in 2018. It almost feels like they rushed through their testing program in 2017 to get to that point. There are some analysts who believe that this is all part of a very systematic effort on North Korea's part. That maybe as early as 2016, they were planning to get through the testing period in 2017 and then launch a diplomatic phase in 2018. So this may not be spur of the moment. This may be quite a long-term plan. The New Year's speech, we remember it when Kim talked about attending the Winter Olympics with a North Korean athletic and cultural delegation. But he said more than that in the speech. In the New Year's speech, he talked about improving the frozen inter-Korean relationships. He talked about easing military tensions. He talked about cooperation exchange on a broad scale to remove misunderstandings and distrust. The speech seemed to be significant in retrospect. He also announced in that speech, New Year's 2018, that North Korea had accomplished its goal of perfecting its national nuclear forces. So he's more or less declaring victory for the program at that point. The Winter Olympics felt like a logical thing to happen. They weren't that much of a surprise, really, if you think about it. Because what did they get out of it? What South Korea got out of North Korean involvement was some assurance that North Korea would not disrupt the Olympics, which was a fear South Korea had. So they got some assurance the Olympics would proceed smoothly. What the North Koreans got was the illusion that they're not isolated internationally, that they could go to the games along with other countries and participate. And they also got 600 all-expense-paid vacations for Kim Jong-un loyalists, because South Korea paid for all of that. That's not a small thing. But what's been more significant since then is what else has happened, including the virtual moratorium on testing. North Korea's not tested a missile or a nuclear device since November. That's quite a long pause. They didn't announce it. They're just kind of doing that. The other surprise was they agreed to meet for the Inter-Korean Summit in Panmunjom on the DMZ, where in the past they always emphasized the need to go to Pyongyang for earlier summits. And they've not insisted on the suspension of U.S.-Korean joint military exercises as a price for talks. So something is afoot. They seem to want these talks to happen. Then we had the South Korean delegation come to Washington, D.C. on March 8th to brief the White House on their delegation's visit to Pyongyang. And they also delivered their unwritten invitation from Kim Jong-un to summit with President Trump. And I imagine the South Korean delegation, the Chinese, North Koreans, and most of the U.S. government were surprised that that invitation got taken up so quickly. Next, less noticed was the North Korean foreign minister's visit to Sweden, March 15th and 16th. So we're seeing North Korea reach out to more than just Washington and Seoul. They're also reaching out to Europe. Why Sweden? Well, Sweden is the U.S.'s protecting power in North Korea. So we've got a diplomatic relationship with Sweden in North Korea already. Sweden's also a non-permanent member of the Security Council this year, 2017-2018. So they're a logical place to be on the agenda. And it's worth noting that the North Korean foreign minister, Young-ho, actually served in Stockholm during his diplomatic career. So there's some comfort level between the North Korean foreign minister and operating in Sweden. On the other hand, Kim Jong-un, as we remember, studied in Geneva. So there's some Swiss connections too. So when you look at the list of places the U.S.-North Korean summit could take place, we don't know what the 5 places are being considered, but Sweden and Switzerland may well be in that mix. Then we had the March visit of Kim Jong-un to China. Significant because it was Kim Jong-un's first visit that we know of outside of North Korea during his time. And again, it seems logical in retrospect, how could Kim Jong-un meet with President Trump without meeting with Xi Jinping first? It's supposed to be a Chinese-North Korean alliance. It's the only military alliance China has in the world, so that seemed like it kind of had to happen. The other benefit to North Korea is they get to go into the meetings now with Moon Jae-in and with President Trump, potentially, with an appearance of some backing from China. That'll strengthen their hand. Okay, now let's skip to what does the Kim regime want out of talks? They will have several objectives, which are not mutually exclusive, and I put them into 3 categories. One is improvement in the status of the DPRK. Second is an end to what they call hostile acts. It's a term they often use. And third is settlements, by which I mean resolutions to outstanding long-term problems. For status, this is kind of a dream come true for Kim Jong-un. Last year was exchanging insults on a level playing field with the President of the United States. It's quite an accomplishment. And now if he gets to engage in diplomacy at summit level, Kim Jong-un will look like a world statesman. It's very good for North Korea's status. It'll also give the Kim regime the chance to be seen more legitimately as the government of North Korea in perpetuity, which is something they've struggled for also. The idea of being on the world stage doing diplomacy with Europeans and the Chinese and the Americans and Japanese makes the Kim regime look like it's more in charge than they ever were before. Recognition's nuclear state. People talk about this as being a key objective. I'm not so sure. I think North Korea has recognized itself as a nuclear state. Whether we call it one or not, they've sort of achieved that status de facto. And if we're talking about denuclearization, doesn't that imply that we think they've got nuclear weapons? So maybe they're already there in terms of that recognition. The end to hostile acts. North Korea always says they want 2 things out of talks: security assurances and end to hostile acts. Those probably mean sanctions. They probably mean diplomatic isolation. They may mean U.S. criticism of North Korea's human rights record. They often take that very seriously, and they consider that a hostile act too. So that may be part of the negotiations. Exercises with U.S. and ROK. The news this morning appears to be Seoul saying that Kim Jong-un is now not interested in insisting upon the immediate withdrawal of U.S. forces in exchange for denuclearization. But we'll see. It's been a long-term goal of theirs. Settlements, the peace treaty. Now, we talk about the peace regime on the peninsula. What we have on the peninsula now is an armistice. The Korean War never really ended officially. And there's often been talk about some kind of a peace settlement to replace the armistice, but it's never gotten very far. That may now start to be on the table. One of the reasons for that would be that South Korean rhetoric towards unification has altered under Moon Jae-in, where earlier administrations talked about trying to unify the peninsula within the foreseeable future with economic benefits. Now Moon Jae-in talks about unification being a very gradual sort of an organic process. More exchange of trade, more people-to-people contacts, and slowly, the countries will grow together. That may be the kind of view of unification that Kim Jong-un could understand and live with. Winding up the armistice is not just for North and South Korea. It is a UN armistice. So at some point, this is going to end up in Geneva or New York. I'd like to see some international law experts get to work on what that actually means. How would you replace the armistice? How would you wind it up? Okay, skip that. So diplomacy for 2018. 2018 is a big year for North Korea. I think this is worth remembering, too. September 9th is going to be a very significant date. It'll be the 70th anniversary of the founding of the North Korean state. And in Kim Jong-un's New Year's address, he talked about how 2018 was a highly auspicious year because of the big 70th anniversary. Between now and September 9th, I think it's very likely North Korea will not want to disrupt the diplomatic process. They will look very accommodating because they'll want talks to proceed and have North Korea reach a status of being a major international interlocutor before that date. It's not the only date that matters. We have our dates, too. U.S. has November midterm elections. I think the president's going to have in mind the appearance of the United States heading into the midterms. And in June of this year, South Korea has local elections, which, although are local, are very important for Moon Jae-in and his party. They see this as being a chance to consolidate their grip on South Korean politics. So he, too, has an incentive to look like he's making progress in doing the correct things towards North Korea. Why now? Why hasn't this happened before? You can't say for sure. Some believe that because sanctions are working, that Kim Jong-un can see that there's a point in the future, a year and a half away, where it make a difference. And he needs to negotiate now before the sanctions actually haven't been up against the ropes. Not everyone believes that, but it's an argument you hear. It may be they're simply at a period of having to lull in their testing. It may be having had all of their launches and nuclear tests in 2017. They just need time to reset the testing program. And if that's the case, then why not use the time for negotiations? Make it look like you're being reasonable. What are the risks? Symmetry is high opportunity and high risk. The opportunity is maybe, just maybe, the leaders of the United States and North Korea could actually get into a room and resolve something. This is what we simply wanted after all. We said the reason for maximum pressure was to bring North Korea to the table. If they're coming to the table, isn't this what success looks like? But the risks are three, as far as I can see. One is if the summit goes badly between the President Trump and Kim Jong-un, but it went very well between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in, then the appearance is Koreans can get along fine, the U.S. is the problem. This could be a wedge-driving practice on North Korea's part or an attempt. Second, in their desire to achieve a deal quickly, they could rush into an unsustainable or destabilizing agreement. What if Kim Jong-un tells President Trump, gosh darn it, you win, I'll denuclearize, all I ask for is that you leave the peninsula with your troops and have a peace treaty? And what if we did that without an intrusive inspections regime to make sure promises are being kept? Third danger is a breakdown of negotiations. Even if North Korea intends them to go well, if they don't work, if there's a misunderstanding, and the U.S. or North Korea break off the talks, then we're back to where we were at the end of 2017, which was a dangerous situation indeed, and without the possibility of diplomacy happening again in the future. We're back to the question about whether they could live with nuclear North Korea. That's a grim note to end on, but I think I'll end on that note.
Thank you. We've had plenty of optimism, so a little grimness may be appropriate. Bill, you can try to thread the needle and get us somewhere between total optimism and total upset.
And you're asking the dismal science to provide that, huh? Actually, could you put up my my few slides? Oh. Hi, everybody. I'm trying to focus on the economic issues, but from a little different perspective than we often do. I'm trying to look at it, think of the level of the North Korean cabinet, not Kim Jong-un, but the next level of the government. A cabinet in a socialist system, the command economy system, is an incredibly important economic organization. They, in effect, run all the state industries. So it's not like our cabinet. It's a very powerful group of men. So I want to sort of focus on them a little bit and think about how they are reacting to the current situation that they probably don't have much control over this high-level politics, but they have to react to it. So I'm trying to focus a little bit at that level. I like this picture. I used it in a paper for NCNK of Pak Pong-ju. He's the premier. You saw him give the assembly speech last week for the budget. I like the picture because I've been watching Pak Pong-ju for quite a long time. He's been a person who's survived several purges, and he's very close to, he was close to or people in the government who they've been argued are a little bit reform-oriented, but he's kind of survived that. If you look at his picture, this is from Norong Shinmun, from KCNA, he's visiting the Pukchang power plant. Pukchang thermal power plant is the huge power plant that provides about half of North Korea's thermal electricity, about a third of all of its electricity. Huge plant, the most important institution in North Korea, I would argue. He's visiting there in November, and what is on his face? Trouble. I'm thinking he is looking at this economy as one in trouble. That's my view too. Let me find the right slide here. I must have dropped that slide. Oh no, here it is. Just got out of order. So the trouble comes in two areas, I'm thinking. One is a very short-term trade issue with China. Trade with China, I don't think people quite have gotten the message. North Korea's trade with China has just slammed shut in the last 6 months. And this is not a small deal. If you look, sorry, I have to go back to the, if you look at their trade partners, I mean, that's China, right? I mean, North Korea's foreign trade is China, nobody else. It's not really that unusual. It's a next-door neighbor. So nobody else wants to trade with them. So it's not that unusual. And my point is, it's just totally dominated by trade with China. Now look what's happened with trade with China. If you can see the chart, this last point on the far right, that's February data. North Korea's exports to China were, get this, $9 million. That's nothing. You can see it on the chart. It looks like nothing. February's a weak month anyway, but even so, it's like nothing. What actually interested me more from the February data, now we're waiting for the March data in the next week, is North Korean imports from China also fell really sharply. You see that higher line, but they imported $103 million. That's nothing, okay? North Korea's foreign trade in February was virtually nothing. Now we think of it as a self-reliant place. No, it's not. It's really not a self-reliant country. I can go into that. But for me, though, for this cabinet, this has got to be a shocking development. And it's not something they could have planned a year ago. This is, I think people are missing the boat when Kim Jong-un has planned this out. Well, I don't think he planned for $9 million of exports to China. Now, you can argue that the Chinese are lying with their data. Yeah, I'm sure the data is not that accurate. But why would the Chinese be wanting to tell the world that they're not trading with North Korea? They're telling all the North Koreans, they're telling all the Chinese. Maybe there's some secret deals in here, but nobody knows about them. The public demonstration by China that they don't want to trade with North Korea is hugely important in North Korea. So if you're a North Korean, you're seeing this data, you're getting it. You're saying China doesn't want to trade with us. Oh my gosh. So this is what these economic players, the cabinet people, are having to deal with. Again, I sort of focus on Pak Pong-ju because he's the premier, but also he's been around a long time, survived purges. The others, some of them I don't know. I don't know the new, but you can look at those categories and put yourself in their shoes. How are you dealing with the economy right now, today in mid-April 2018. I must admit, in the paper, I was focusing a little bit on the budget meetings that just happened, hoping to see some progress in them. I didn't see any progress at all. So in these big publicized budget meetings, they didn't give any attention to trade. It's kind of unbelievable. They don't, but they give so little notion to changing, reforming, adjusting their economy to this impact. It's making me think, maybe optimistically, that they're on hold. I think North Korean economic decision-making right now is on hold. Waiting for what? Waiting for these summits. I think these summits are incredibly important for this cabinet. They don't know what to do. They don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to get gifts or not? We don't know, and they don't know. Nobody knows at this point. But there's a second set of problems that are much more longer term in nature. And I would call this the steady erosion of the state system, the command economy system. This has been going on for decades, okay? I've been talking about it, John Merrill and I have been talking about this for years and years. But it keeps going, it keeps steadily going, and by now I think it's accelerating toward a market economy. So how does a cabinet have to deal with this? Oh my gosh, this means they're not in control of the market economy, they're in control of the state economy. The state economy is losing over to the market. So every one of these dudes, they're like head of the mining industry, he's losing power to the market. People are selling coal on the marketplace. It must be incredibly difficult for these people. How to manage a command economy, we can talk about how that works if you want, but it's such a different system than a market economy. How do you manage it in the face of people having money and spending money and buying things outside of your ministries? So these are just some data points. Well, let me. How are they? Do you think they're looking at their solutions to these? I broke it down into two sort of categories. One we might call macroeconomic issues, and one microeconomic issue. Macroeconomic issues, think money, okay? How to deal with money. Now, every government, every cabinet has to deal with money. The odd thing is, for North Korea, this is kind of a new thing. In the command economy system, you basically don't have money. Everything is rationed and planned and ordered, commanded, as we say. In a market economy, everything is all the decisions are made by money, prices, profits, that kind of thing. So with this money economy, the cabinet has to worry about money, the value of won. Now, Kim Jong-un has done a great job, in a way, in the last 5 or 6 years of getting control over inflation and getting control over a drop in the value of the won. During the his father's regime, the won deteriorated extremely rapidly. He's got a hold of that somehow and has managed to hold the won at 8,000 won per dollar for about 4 or 5 years. Not something I would have predicted he could have done. So I think if you go to a checklist, what has Kim Jong-un accomplished? That's got to be one of his big things. Big positives is control over the money system. That in itself is creating more private activity. Private activity needs a decent money system to work from. I always said that was constraining North Korean development because they didn't have a decent money system. Now, by golly, it looks like they do. And the private market economy is growing as a result. So this is a very good thing for productivity. Private money is always used better than public money, and people are becoming more productive, and you're seeing some signs of that in the North Korean economy. So a very, very good thing. So how has he maintained that 8,000? How has he done that? And how is he going to do that in the face of this huge trade imbalance, growing in trade imbalance? This is a big quandary for all of us economists. But we can look at it in a number of ways they can do that. Most of them are very bad for the state economy and good for the private economy. An example would be constraining credit, not producing yuan credit. If you think about it, everybody in North Korea now, it's what we call a partially dollarized economy. Everybody has dollars in their wallet, U.S. dollars, and North Korean won, and it's a very liberal market in that. It's like Hong Kong. You can have dollars or yuan. You can spend whichever you want. That rate between them, 8,000 won, somehow is magically kept even. But it's not going to necessarily stay that way, except the government tries to maintain it. So how do they maintain that? Not printing very much yuan. If they print too much yuan, people will start getting the sense of that, inflation will start growing, and the yuan will crack. I like to make a point of this exchange rate. This is the $1 exchange rate. And you notice in recent months, it's been extremely stable. So stable, it's like it's a peg. It's upside down, so it looks like an 8 minutes instead of 3 minutes. Sorry. So that steadiness suggests intervention. And intervention by the government to keep that black market rate steady is just very interesting to me in the face of this big deficit with China. As I say, there are ways to do that. We can talk about them. It also, to me, is a huge vulnerability of the government. I mean, you can imagine, I'm imagining if these talks don't work well, summit talks don't work well. Trump, I think last week said, well, we might have, if we have them, we're not guaranteed to have them, but if we're going to have the talks, we're going to make some progress. If we don't make some progress, we're going to go back, I'm going to walk out respectfully, and we're going to return to maximum pressure. This is not a government perspective. I've never heard the governments talk like this. I would say I'm going to attack that rate. I'm going to make, because it's $1, U.S. has control over dollars. We can break that rate. That would create massive inflation and unemployment, disruption in North Korea. That, to me, is maximum pressure. Given the attention they're using to keeping that steady, I would say, North Korea would be very afraid of that happening. A lot of other points here in my paper. Micro points, the food issue. This time of year is always when they start running short of food. The data I have show that there's no price pressure so far on it. Seems to be okay. But they're not importing any food, and every now and then they have a bad harvest. They have a bad harvest, they're going to need to import a lot of food. In the current environment, they're not going to get aid. They need aid, right? So they got to protect themselves for aid somehow. Petroleum, they're not importing any refined products. They're getting free crude oil from China. All of their petroleum comes from China free. And I've been complaining about that. Why don't the Chinese charge? I suspect Xi Jinping says, that's our last big trump card. North Korea does something wrong, we're going to turn off that valve. And North Korea has no petroleum. What are they going to do? These are the kind of things that cabinet has to worry about. Bottom line from my talk is I think North Korea is under excruciating economic pressure. Just in the last 6 months from these China sanctions and over the long term of the steady erosion of its planned economy. This excruciating pressure, in my mind, is why Kim is summiting. He doesn't have any choice. That gives us, our side, huge leverage on him. I'm very optimistic that as long as the Chinese and us are on board with it, and the South Koreans, I think we're at a turning point in North Korean history. We're at a point that not only can we solve this nuclear issue, to me much more important is the North Korean system issue, their Marxist-Leninist system. That is the guts of the problem. Kim Jong-un says to Trump, I'm not going to get rid of my weapons until you stop being hostile. If I were Trump, I would return and say, okay, as long as you have this dadgum socialist Marxist system that treats your people so badly, we're going to be hostile. So let's fix that system then you don't need nuclear weapons. So if I were our side, I would aim high here. And by aiming high, I mean changing the nature of this dadgum socialist economy. There's room to do that because Kim it's happening anyway, okay? And I think Kim might be able to jump on board of that if we exert the right kind of pressure.
Thank you, Bill. Now we turn to General Chen.
Thank you. The good news is that I'm the last guy speaking, so. KEI asked me to give my assessment of what I thought the strategy of the North Korean military would be for 2018. And like the other panelists, the situation has been changing, so I'm going to try my best. Because of the overwhelming optimism on the Korean Peninsula, I'm going to spare a couple of minutes to peace and see what would happen if peace did miraculously appear on the Korean Peninsula. So we know on the 27th of April, the North and South Korean leaders are going to talk about denuclearization and some sort of regime for a peace on the Korean Peninsula. And that this denuclearization, it seems, is going to mean complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement. Wow. If the North Koreans agree to this, gee, I'm going to be a very happy South Korean. Secondly, they seem to think that they're going to proclaim an end of the Korean War, a peace regime, the first step to a peace treaty. Fine with me. Let's look at some of the details on the military side in order to do this. First, the North Korean military will probably be really busy dismantling their rockets and their nuclear warheads. Not an easy task, but Japan has already stepped forward to pay a portion of the bill, so I'm sure the North Koreans will be happy with that. But I think the other challenge for the North Korean military will be the indoctrination of their troops. They have to come up with a whole new set of logic about what they're why they are giving up their nuclear weapons. And if I were in Kim Jong-un's position, this is going to be a big problem. And the North Korean military will probably be very consumed in this indoctrination of their troops. It is not going to be an easy task for them. Finally, there's already talk of demilitarizing the demilitarized zone. Now, to a layman, that might mean that, they must be saying that they're going to get rid of their machine guns, which they have. Well, it's more than machine guns. Demining the area. It's going to take years. I'm just glad I'm not going to be the one that's going to be tasked with it. If any of you are in the business of demining, this is a good stock to invest in. Redeploying North Korean long-range artillery. That's also happy news for me, but a lot of work for the North Koreans. But the real good news for us South Koreans is tunnels. Guess where the entry point for those tunnels are in North Korea? They're within the DMZ. That's what we think. If the North Koreans are willing to agree that we South Koreans would be able to visit their GPs or some of the places that we think that they're the entrance for their tunnels, this would be a great advantage for us. So for the North Koreans to agree to denuclearization, to go ahead with a peace treaty which would entail and include some sort of demilitarization, true demilitarization of the DMZ, I think would keep them busy for a great deal of time, especially for 2018. Now, does this sound too good to be true for you guys? If it does, what has life taught us? If it's too good, don't trust it. And so I think the trust factor is the most important thing here. So let's go back to reality and just see what could happen, which is a nightmare for a South Korean like myself, which is the talks might go okay. I mean, the summit might go okay, but the devils will be in the details. And during the process of this year alone, I'm sure the North Koreans will, at least some of them, will continue the development of their ability to improve their accuracy, the reentry capability of their long-range missiles, and the potency of their nuclear weapons. So I'm sure that that is one area that they will focus on and will try to hide. Secondly, I believe that this year will be very important, no matter what, for the North Koreans to indoctrinate their troops and their population. The recent exchange of musicians between the North and South, well, actually the South sent musicians to the North, but most of the audience were not your average day Pyongyang citizens. They were mostly people who had already contacted with foreigners, who already knew about other lives outside of North Korea. So this means to me that Kim Jong-un is not so secure about his own people. So within this year, especially within the military, they're going to start, I believe, a very sincere indoctrination program of their troops, so that none of the strange information will contaminate their troops. I also believe that clandestine capabilities, to include cyber capability, which is a underestimated capability that we do not take seriously enough, only verbally, will be improved continuously. Other capabilities like drones, electronic warfare, and other less obvious capabilities will also be improved for many various reasons. And other potent capabilities that they might have. They export poisons, which does not even include weapons of mass destruction. You know, your everyday poisons to kill people. You know, they develop it. They are willing to sell it to buyers. So those kind of activities, illicit activities, I'm sure will be continued this year. North Korea, ever since its conception, has developed 3 strategies for unifying the peninsula by force. Number 1 is to use surprise. Number 2 is to conduct a decisive operations, which means quick operations. Number 3 is combined operations, which is the combination of conventional and unconventional operations. I believe that the North Koreans do not have the ability now. Their military, their tanks are too old, their planes are obsolete. So they can't do this. But the intent is there, and I don't think that that intent has changed. So for this year, no matter what the summit brings us, the North Koreans will be busy. They will still be busy, and they will still be developing their capabilities to achieve the ultimate intent, which is to unify the Korean Peninsula under their terms. And also, let us not forget that propaganda, information operations is a very, very potent ability that the North Koreans have. I've feared North Korean information/psychological operations all my life, more than nuclear weapons. Thank you.
Thank you, General Chen. Well, we have a good deal of time for discussion, and I imagine there are lots of questions. Given the timeliness of the topic, given the importance of the topics being raised by our 4 speakers, there are a lot of questions to be raised, and some of them are forward-looking, like what happens if we do have a positive summit on April 27th, just a week away, and there is an upbeat mood heading into the next summit with President Trump, and then the next summit with General Secretary Xi Jinping, now expected in early June. And so there's a lot happening, and we have to sort of play out these scenarios. If we get progress until this key date in September, where we celebrate in North Korea the 70th anniversary, what comes with that? If this is sustained for several months, what does that mean for the public relations strategy, for the diplomatic strategy, and for the economic and military strategies? If, on the other hand, things break down at some point, what is the fallback for all of these strategies? So I'm sure that all of you have a lot of questions, and your questions will help us finalize these papers as each of the authors thinks further about them, along with the impact of the April 27th summit, and then we get to the point where these ideas become finalized in a form where they can be put in print, even though they may be outdated 2 weeks later. So, please let us know your questions. Yes, ma'am. Do you have a microphone there? Yeah, good.
My name is Claudia Trevisan. I'm from the Brazilian newspaper Estado de São Paulo. Considering the fact that this external enemy is so crucial for the ideology of North Korea, can the regime survive in a scenario where it gives up its nuclear weapons and make peace with the South? What would be the rationale for the survival of the regime? And the second is, how do you see the China role, especially in this moment where there is increasing tensions with the United States, trade tension, and also the ZTE decision that enraged China? Do you expect China to continue to put the pressure that it's been putting on North Korea from now on? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that one question and then go on to the next one. Who would like to respond? Okay, a couple of responses. Go ahead.
I think maybe I'll touch up on the ideological foundation of North Korea peace. It's been clear from what Kim has been doing domestically during his peace initiatives abroad that he is very concerned about what the peace message abroad is translated to for his people, and the Army Day parade that he undertook just before the Peace Olympics is a key evidence of that. There's been reports that the people are more and more becoming wary about Kim's Pyongyang policy, and for him, the Peace Olympics was in a way a means to prove to his people and justify why he's doing what he's doing abroad. So let me put it this way: when he was going abroad to do the Olympics, one thing that he has done at home was to tell his people that, look, the South Koreans are now coming to the Macroeconomic ski resort to do a joint ski training. And this is something that I have been planning all along. So my decision to develop this luxury establishment, despite all this crushing poverty, is not, it wasn't a short-sighted, financially stupid decision, but rather something that I've foreseen for a very long time. And that for him is a way of justifying both his Pyongyang policy and his legitimacy as the ruler. A second aspect of that is the Army Day parade, of him just gesticulating to his people that actually we have these peaceful intentions, but we are formidable and we have these strength and capabilities to engage in negotiations with external partners. And actually, I'm going out there to gain what is precisely ours, and that is status and prestige.
Go ahead.
Taking turns. I used to think that North Korea had to have an eternal enemy. That used to be kind of my thinking, but I've changed my mind about that. I'm not sure that's true. North Korea would be able to rationalize an agreement, I think, without too much difficulty. they would say they won. They're not coming to negotiate to give up to U.S. demands to denuclearize. They're coming because their nuclear program forced America to the negotiating table. And they forced America to accept a settlement on the peninsula. They would portray this as a victory. And we tend to think about the military parade on April 8th. The parts you saw on television were the parts about rolling weaponry down the streets, missiles. Most of that parade was actually in terms of celebrating their economic achievements. It was construction crews and machinery. It was other things other than military. So this Pyongyang idea that Kim Jong-un is promoting a better life for North Koreans has been central to his message. And if he sticks to that I'm making life better for North Koreans, he doesn't have to have a hostile, eternal enemy, I don't think.
Bill? Yeah, two parts to your question. Let me address the China part first. I think, China's interests here are like ours, but not coincidental with ours. I mean, they have different ideas than we do. But the one thing that I'm pretty sure that they want stability in North Korea. You might argue we want some kind of instability. I want some instability that forces some change there. China basically wants stability. But I think it's come to the point in North Korea that it recognizes North Korea is becoming more unstable, especially on the economy side, and even some crazy actions by the regime. So I think as long as China is focused on North Korean stability, and it's going to be very careful with its sanctions policy, and that's something we have to be very concerned about. I think, though, we do have a commonality of, in the long term, I think we want a stable North Korea too. We just want a different North Korea. I think China does too at this point. So I think if we can together push reforms on North Korea, force it to reform, and I think these summits are offering a great opportunity to do that, I think we might have some huge successes. And that relates, I think, to North Korea's need for an enemy. In the real world, it does have an enemy. A socialist economy has the rest of the world as an enemy. A socialist economy cannot trade with a market economy. It just doesn't work. If you think about two very different price systems, I'm not saying one's better than the other. Of course, I think capitalism is better, but even if you're socialist, you can't trade with a capitalist country, and that's just the facts of life. And North Korea is the only really socialist country left in the world in that sense. So for them to deal with the rest of the world, they have an enemy, but I would argue they need to reform, and I'm cautiously optimistic they're going to do that.
Next question. Yes, over there.
John Burton with the Korea Times. How much relevance does the 1991 Inter-Korean agreement have to the upcoming Moon-Kim talks? Do you think that would serve as a framework in any way?
We'll take a few more questions. Here, please.
Hi, I'm Suyan from Radio Free Asia. I have a question regarding peace treaty. So Moon Jae-in reported that North Korea won't seek any withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea, but only security of his regime. I mean, I kind of get that, but so my question is, what could the actual action or measures followed? Like Mark mentioned a little bit about maybe UN will be involved with this a procedure. So I kind of want to know what the specific actions will be followed. Thank you.
Okay, question back there. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Diane Perlman, School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason. First of all, Kim Jong-un is around 35, and there seems to be a change in his attitude, in the way he's presenting himself. And I think some of it because he has secured some credibility, leverage with his program. So one is there somebody else that's driving this shift in policy? And the other question, can you envision a win-win strategy that could be optimal, that could be accepted by all sides, this opportunity, some third way?
And one final question.
Michael Marshall, Global Peace Foundation, about the peace talks between between Kim and President Moon. Obviously, there's news reports that some discussions along these lines are happening. President Trump has said, "You go forward with my blessings." My question is, what could the scope of those talks be? What would be the issues that could be covered without including the U.S.? It would seem to be somewhat limited, but what would the scope be?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have material from many respondents. Who else? Who would like to go first here? No?
I'll talk a little bit to this peace talks business, which in the 91, I think the 91 framework deal is one of the questions. All this series of negotiations that Mark has been talking about. First of all, I think we need to accept the fact that they've failed, totally abysmally failed, not casting blame on any person or administration, government, but they basically failed, getting us to this point that we are now. So I'm thinking a lot of this looking at the past is the wrong way to look at things. I think we need to take fresh looks. I could care less what Kim Jong-un thinks about when he says peace treaty, what's in his mind when he says peace treaty. I want a peace treaty is going to be negotiated. It's got to have a list of things in it. It's going to have U.S. troops withdrawal. We're going to say no. Flat out, no, I don't care what he said 20 years, his father said 20 years ago. So I think we need to back off a little bit on this extreme looking at the past. I don't think the past is going to help us a whole lot. The past is maybe has some lessons. The framework deal, to me, has some lessons. I know there are a lot of people who like the framework. I thought the framework agreement was a terrific mistake. That, to me, was the last time we had a chance for North Korea to really reform. It didn't. I think it didn't because of this peace kind of initiative that happened after the framework agreement, all the aid that they got. But don't forget, about 1 million or 2 million North Koreans died in the aftermath of that from famine. And they kept up fits and starts this nuclear program, bringing us to here. So I would like just sort of to put the past in the past, look to the future, look concretely at what's being offered. Give this young man, Kim Jong-un, maybe he has a long life ahead of him, make him look for the future. Who's advising him? I would love to know. I'm sure there are people advising him, but I don't think we know who they are. The women around him may be very important, but they're people who we don't hear about anymore, like his sister. His aunt, Kim Kyung-hee. What's happened to her? I don't know. Did she die or not? There's a lot of that kind of information we just, at least I don't have. But I think that's why I'm trying to focus on the cabinet level people. I think I don't have the answers, but I think analysts, media, everybody, we should focus on other people in North Korea other than Kim Jong-un. So I really appreciate that question. I just don't have a very good answer for it.
General Chun, on the peace treaty, what do you think is the discussion in South Korea now, the division on what kind of this peace agreement could come up next week, and what would Moon Jae-in accept?
I think so far what they're talking about is a declaration to say that we have an end to the Korean War. That's about it. I think they're looking at the significance of that proclamation right now. Now, the thought of having a peace treaty has been studied for many, many years within the Republic of Korea. From the Ministry of Defense side, we were looking at, as you said, reduction of U.S. forces, arms control issues, and the fate of organizations like the United Nations Command. All of these could lead to a potential weakening of the defensive capabilities of the Republic of Korea, and that's why we are very cautious of this. And changes that we are not too sure what the second and third order effects might be. For instance, the northern limit line it's something that a lot of people think that is not worth upholding anymore. Well, we really have not had the ability to think through the second and third order effects of these kind of things. And if at the pace that that people are seeking to achieve some results, might not afford us the kind of time that should be allocated to these efforts. So that's what, to my knowledge, that we're looking at for a peace regime. So in order to get to a real peace regime, the lesson that I would have for myself is don't rush into it. You can declare what you want, end of war, fine. But again, the devils are in the details. And the North Koreans, if they want to build trust, like I said, let's start with the DMZ. Show us your GPs. Take out your 5,000 artillery pieces that threaten Seoul. It's easy to do. Turn the tunnels for the artillery sites into a tourist attraction. I'd be willing to pay $5 to go there and look at their underground facilities. Would be a good place to maybe store wine. So I think there would be good creative things that we can do about this. The significance of a difference between 91 and this year, we have a new guy on the block, Kim, and he's got nuclear weapons. So these two things I think is pretty significant. And, a win-win situation. This morning I was watching American TV, and I guess this guy, I did not see his name, but he said that if Mr. Trump, could get a deal like the Iran deal, which allows Iran to have its capabilities intact in 15 years, it would be a win for Mr. T and for the United States. I, as a South Korean, don't agree with that. If the North Koreans have the same capability as they have today, 15 years from now, and that's the deal, that's not good for me. Thank you.
Okay, more questions, please. Or do you want to comment?
Yes. Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
We'll take them on.
On the question of who else is driving Kim Jong-un's strategy, I think there's an important person that I already mentioned, who is his sister, Kim Yo-jong. She's the de facto propagandist for the regime. She is widely credited for some of the discernible changes in the way that Kim Jong-un does his public messaging. A key example is from last year when the North Korean media, for the first time in its history, actually admitted to the failure of one of its missile launches by saying that it was a technical failure. And that's something that, even though it might seem insignificant, it's something that the regime has never done before. And Kim Yo-jong, in an initiative to sort of transform both the public relations and the regime propaganda machinery, has undertaken at least some limited transparency measures to communicate with with the North Korean domestic audience. She's also credited for the number of public appearances that Kim Jong-un does, including his frequent visits to the army and state-run factories, as well as the accompaniment of his wife, Ri Sol-ju, with him everywhere he goes. So I would say she's an important figure.
Yeah, 4 points quickly because they were terrific questions. First, I'm not sure the past matters all that much. I think I agree with my fellow panelists because things are different now. In the past, North Koreans could be relied on to have a couple of very solid approaches into diplomacy. One was they were always incredibly detailed about history. They knew exactly what happened in previous talks. Whenever Americans met with North Korean negotiators, they remembered exactly what had been said in the previous rounds. And they tried to signal us by using words or not using words they'd used before. Americans don't have that kind of sense of history, so often led to misunderstandings. I'm not sure that's going to be true under Kim Jong-un. I'm not sure they're going to worry about what got said in the past that much. Second, patience. North Koreans are always more patient than the Americans or South Koreans in talks. They thought they had time on their side. So we were quick to try to make more gestures to move things along. They would wait. Kim Jong-un is notoriously impatient. And so both those former techniques may not apply anymore. And third, these are the first talks ever that'll be top-down. In previous talks, you've always had either the North Koreans or the Americans have to refer back to capital for checking on concessions or instructions. Now you've got the two people in the room who don't need to do that. So the dynamics can be very different. Second, who to watch for North Korean government. I would keep an eye on where Young-ho, their foreign minister, is at any given time, because he was involved in every negotiation back to agreed framework. And he led the six-party talks. He's our experienced U.S. handler. So I'll see where he is in the room. And their former spy master, Kim Yong-chol, who led the delegation nominally to Pyongyang, and seems to be a significant figure also. We'll watch where he is. Third, the process, it could be bilateral for a while, but it's going to have a multilateral element, because whether the six parties reconvene or not, they probably won't. The six countries in the six-party talks, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, China, U.S., Russia, are the ones that have to agree on any kind of real settlement. So it's going to get multilateral. And the UN role has to be played because the armistice is a UN armistice, and that still matters legally. Last thing I would say is, I'm not sure I would say that policies failed in the past in North Korea. I mean, one question is not how they developed nuclear weapons, but why it took them 30 years. We did in a couple of years. It may be the sanctions and international pressure kept them from developing their weapons very quickly. And that long delay before they got to this point may have eroded their economy to the point where diplomacy might work.
Okay, another round of questions, please. We'll start there. John?
Thanks, Gil. I have a couple of questions and a couple of comments. I'd like to ask Bill Brown about the problem of the stickiness of sanctions. I vividly remember the Banco Delta Asia sanctions and how long and how difficult it was to lift those. If we take the same amount of time lifting current sanctions, whatever agreement is reached is, I would maintain, going to fall apart. The sanctions have to be released in a phased way, pegged to whatever North Korea is doing. Second is a technical question which no one has brought up. I had an email exchange with Sig Hecker, former director of Los Alamos, maybe 10 days ago. Sig says that the warheads in North Korea are going to have to be dismantled by North Korean technicians. Department of Energy personnel are not going to get anywhere near those things. That's one part of the problem. The other part is the cleanup of their nuclear facilities. And according to SIG, the plutonium production facilities are going to have to be cleaned up by conducting more reprocessing campaigns. So I wonder if people are ready for that, because it's coming if denuclearization really goes forward. And lastly, a question for General Chun. I thought you were pretty evasive, General, because you didn't confront at all the question of asymmetries. If North Korea gives up a significant part of its nuclear weapons program, and since they don't have much else except some asymmetric capabilities, how are we going to compensate for that? I remember at what is now a much maligned conference at Stanford, co-sponsored with SAIS, we had an U.S. Air Force retired general who said maybe the Russians and Chinese will have to give them advanced conventional weaponry. Assuming that peace doesn't break out, how are you going to compensate North Korea for what they give up on the military front?
Dan Lieberman, it was mentioned that North Korea wants unification only on its own terms. I was wondering if you could be more specific and mention what are those terms, and does South Korea have any terms for unification? And I'm not sure if I'm wrong, but wasn't it at one time against the law in South Korea to request unification between South and North Korea? I'm not sure about that.
And let's see, a question right here.
Rob Warren, as Mark pointed out, we're going to have to end up with sort of multilateral discussions. I'd like to raise the issue what Japan's role should be in this. And then, did China have a major factor in bringing the young Kim around to being more favorable in his New Year's address? Did that Chinese envoy that secretly went apparently to talk to Kim Jong-un, did he have influence on this?
Okay, and we'll go over there for a question right there.
My name is Ki-Hoon Lee from the World Bank. I expect that the price of the denuclearization will not be cheap. Maybe could be a multi-billion dollars. I'm wondering who's taking care of the price. Maybe there's a price tag shock. I'm wondering if North Korea is not a member of World Bank and IMF, member of a UN. So maybe there is a role of the multilateral organization like World Bank or IMF.
All right, we have a lot of questions and not a lot of time left, but a couple of minutes each. Yeah, quickly on the U.S. sanctions. I think, in my mind, it's not our sanctions that are the problem. And this is what I like Kim Jong-un's offer to Trump, or proposal, was that basically we end our hostile actions. So to me, if Trump can grab a hold of that idea and that say, okay, we're going to solve our hostility problem, that means a whole host of different things need to come off that we need to change. I argue that it's the fundamental tariffs that we apply to a non-market economy that are much more important on North Korea than are our sanctions. They can't export here because our tariff rates are hugely high for them. So I would start with the TWIA, what we took off and put back on, allow them to start applying to the IMF. Most important to me, I think they need to join the WTO. I think everybody should force them, if they're going to trade with North Korea needs to start joining the WTO. That would erase our big tariffs on them. A lot of good things would start happening once they just make that application. The financial sanctions, they're going to take time to pull off, but they're not, to me, I think we've always exaggerated them. To me, what's binding right now are the Chinese trade sanctions, North Korea's inability to export. And the Chinese can take those off. They may even have done some of them. Some people are arguing over the Kim Trump visit. They can do that even without the UN changes because they're doing more than the UN Security Council demanded. So they can release some of that. My point, though, is that for this North Korean cabinet to fix all of their series of problems, much higher level order things need to change. So that's what I like about the top-down approach. They're not going to be solved in one meeting. This to me is a big worry that expectations are way too high for the Trump-Kim meeting. I would offer they should have a very short cheeseburger lunch and move toward setting up panels that would start approaching all these different problems that we're talking about. Solving these problems are going to take years and years. I mean, getting rid of the nuclear weapons, I can't imagine how complicated. That could take 10, 20, 30 years. The main thing is you need to start moving in that direction, and I think the summitry can start that. Japan has in my thinking, going back to the money problem in North Korea has a huge money problem. It's basically bankrupt. I say it's bankrupt, it's illiquid, it's not insolvent. It's got a lot of state property it could be selling. That to me is its way out, is it needs to privatize the way the Chinese have been doing. That's its salvation. If it works that way, it's not going to cost the rest of the world very much money. But where the rest of the world, including especially the U.S., the Fed, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of Korea, and the People's Bank of China could step in and solidify the North Korean won. That wouldn't cost money because you have such big players doing it. The Japanese side, I would argue, that's where they should put their reparation money. They, in effect, sort of owe North Korea probably about $10-20 billion for the colonial period. Everybody knows they owe that. I don't want them to pay it until North Korea is capable of using that money for its own people. But in some kind of grand scheme of things, Japan should pony up $10 or $20 billion. That's enough to solidify the North Korean won. Of course, to do that, the Japanese are going to have a lot of agreements on their abductees and on normalizing trade, and a lot of good things could happen with that. So Japan is a very important player, especially, I think, on that finance side.
I'll take not every point, but three of them kind of quickly. On sanctions, I worry about the future of sanctions if the talks fail, because the justification for sanctions has been to force North Korea to the table. That's what a lot of countries have been prepared to go along with it. If the table doesn't work, then why should countries help enforce the sanctions? I think that could be a tough thing to try to re-put together. Second, on the warheads, yeah, it's a mess. I've heard an interesting proposal that maybe we should start, as part of the denuclearization process, to ask North Korea to turn over 2 or 3 warheads to another nuclear power like France, to dismantle them and examine them. It'd be a start towards maybe some kind of a cap on weaponry. Nuclear safety could be a positive part of the agenda. Not just the weapons, the warheads. North Korean nuclear reactors are extremely dangerous, it looks like. And maybe North Korea and China and Japan and South Korea could all have a common interest in trying to include nuclear safety as part of some kind of a deal with North Korea. Finally, on China's role, I think it was more negative than positive in terms of China's lack of support for North Korea has led North Korea to have to look elsewhere. That may have created the talks that may be taking place. But if you look at the history, Kim Jong-un emulates Kim Il-sung, his grandfather, wants to be just like him. What did Kim Il-sung do with great powers? He played them off against each other. He was a master at playing the Soviet Union against China. Maybe Kim Jong-un wants to get out from under China's heel and sees a way to play off the U.S. and China against each other for his benefit.
Any further comments here?
Well, since John challenged me, so the more we look into the details, it does not make sense for North Korea to give up their nuclear weapons. I mean, why would they? So I think somewhere along the line there's going to be some sort of compromise. Something that I personally might be willing to accept is nuclear landmines for North Korea. If they were to give up all ability to strike, that's all their missiles, and have nuclear mines within their own country, we're not going to invade them, and they're going to be able to keep their weapons for their own people. Maybe I could live with that. So, other than money, I don't see anything that we, the South Koreans, could give the North Koreans with the consensus of the Korean people. Unification terms, North Koreans, to my knowledge, is guys like me being dead, and that's their terms. South Korean terms is a unified Korean peninsula, a free, democratic peninsula, which to North Koreans must seem like, oh, you mean me dead as well. So unification, I think, is not as easy as we Koreans romantically thought. And I think we Koreans now realize that. That is why it seems now that this Korean government, what they're looking at is a peaceful coexistence. Something like our relations with China, it's a nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there, kind of a deal for the next couple of 100 years. And, eventually, if we have more exchange, it'll turn into something better. I don't think the Americans are going to pay for it. I think they'll tell us Koreans to pay for it like they did before, and maybe the Japanese. So the price tag will be a big problem for us. Thank you.
And thanks to all the...
Sure. Well, I think just to reinforce the points that were previously made on the terms of reunification that South Korea and North Korea proposes. I think it really differs depending on who you ask, whether they're progressive or conservative. But also, I think there's a sense of sort of meaninglessness of even discussing that question, because the terms of reunification are most likely going to be shaped not by North and South Korea, but by United States and China. So that's where I'll end it.
Okay. Important, keeping China in mind always as a force that may be less easy to predict than many have suggested. Well, I want to remind all of you that we will have a book coming out of all this. It'll be available through the KEI website in a matter of months. So please look ahead to that. And thank you all for attending, and thank our panelists.